I think she handles the bow and arrow superbly.
Flow gently, sweet Afton, among thy green graves. Flow gently, I'll sing thee a song in thy praise. My Mary's asleep by thy murmuring stream. Flow gently, sweet Afton, disturb not her dream. Thou stark dove whose echo resounds from the hill. Ye wild whistling blackbirds in yon thorny dell. Oh, green-crested lapwing, thy screaming forbear. I charge you, disturb not my slumbering fair.
All right, we are live. Welcome to the First Impressions podcast. We talk about our love for Jane Austen and give a big middle finger to all those haters. I am Kristin, and I am joined by co-host Maggie. Hello! And we are super excited today to be talking about, we've decided to delve into all the Pride and Prejudice adaptations we hadn't handled yet. So we recently did the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, a review of that movie. And today we are doing a review of the 1940 Pride and Prejudice starring Laurence, Olivier, and Greer Garson, which I have to say, every once in a while I'll be talking to like a friend or family member or some other Austen fan, and I ask them what their favorite adaptation is, and they'll drop that their favorite movie adaptation is this 1940 Laurence Olivier version. And I have to admit, I had never seen it up until, a few weeks ago. I have to admit, I always kind of thought it was maybe an affectation. Like, I hate to say that, but like, it was just the aesthetic, right, of the 1940s, like movie glamour that they were like attracted to here.
Well, my favorite version is the original 1940 screen adaptation starring Sir Laurence Olivier. And you're like, okay, whatever.
But I can't believe what wrong I was doing to this movie, because it's an absolute freaking delight. And I can totally see if this was your first exposure to Pride and Prejudice. Like, I could totally see how this would still be your favorite.
It was really cute.
It was so cute. It was, as we will note, amazingly Hugh's fairly close to the plot of the book, which is pretty amazing for, I feel like, the screenwriting of the time. And also, we know from Devoney Looser's book, The Making of Jane Austen, there's a long chapter about all of the various scripts and all of the various screenwriters who took a shot at this and the insane stuff they inserted that it finally got cut. But yeah, I guess we should say, first of all, overall impressions, you've already said was delightful.
Yes, I would say, I think this might have been kind of our reaction to 2005, although I think I enjoyed this one more. But I will say, as an adaptation, not great. But as a screwball comedy, romantic comedy, so fun. So fun. Just so fun to watch. Bae and I watched it together, and we were just couldn't believe how tickled we were through the whole thing. We really liked it.
As an adaptation, of course, there were a lot of liberties and some things added that don't necessarily strike the same note or the same tone as in the book. And Pemberley is cut entirely. Mm-hmm. However, there were some things that at the core of this movie that I thought were true to the book, enough for me not to be constantly irritated.
Right.
You know
it is super recognizable as Pride and Prejudice.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
You're
it's
not like,
just
what
characters' names.
It's not like your Hallmark movie where they just try to like drop references. Like it is legit Pride and Prejudice.
The trailer and the movie, I think it's just the trailer. Watch the trailer for the movie. It says based on the most famous novel ever written, but also based on the most famous play ever produced or whatever, which is, of course, Helen Jerome's adaptation for the stage, which had the super sexy Darcy, which was like the onset of the Darcy-centered story and script. And Olivier definitely ticked that box, I felt. He's written in his own autobiography that it was hard to make Darcy into anything but a prig, an unattractive prig. However, I think when Olivier is on the screen, you cannot take your eyes off him.
Oh, I mean, it's Laurence fucking Olivier. I mean, Faye was like, who is that guy? And I was like, are you serious? He is the most famous actor of his generation. He is a legend on stage, on screen. I mean, I can understand why when they were making the 1995, Colin Firth was kind of freaking out, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
People are going to be comparing me to Sir Laurence Olivier. I mean, he's just a legend. And I can't remember the last time I saw him in something. And when you see him in, you get it.
Yes.
Like, you get it.
I was a little tainted because before I had ever seen this movie, I had read an unfavorable comparison of Olivier that was saying Firth's performance was better. And what this person was saying, and I wish I could credit this person with their thoughts, but I no longer remember who said it. I just remember reading an article about
anonymous Twitter user.
Yeah, no, it was an actual article, but they had said, Darcy is stiff and with sort of formal and withholding, and Olivier's sort of strength as an actor was that he also held a lot back. So that was a powerful performance without going over the top. And they said a stiff actor in a stiff role was wrong for the character. When we see Firth with so much pent up physicality and angst, that's more powerful. And at the end of the day, I do prefer Firth's portrayal, but I could totally see the people who think that Olivier is the best Darcy, hands down. Yeah. And they give that. What I liked about the script too is they give him a ton of opportunity to actually be quite charming, much more screen time than the original Darcy even has at the book. And he shows that he does have good manners, even though she does overhear the slight. Are you sort of on the same page about him?
Yes. So, okay, let's just dig into the whole Darcy thing, because I think that's one of the big differences between this and other adaptations. So I don't even in my mind compare Olivier and Firth because they are in completely different movies.
Yes.
The 1940 Pride and Prejudice is a screwball comedy. Like, you can tell it's a screwball comedy because everyone is speaking so fast. They looked at me and said, can we turn on captions? I can't understand what anybody is saying. That's like the hallmark, right? It is a romantic comedy. Darcy in the 1940 Pride and Prejudice is very charming throughout the entire thing. There's none of this, oh, well, maybe he has an anxiety disorder. Maybe he's just shy. No, he is super charming and personable, but he's also kind of an asshole. And so the reason why she hates him is not because he's like standoffish and doesn't talk to anybody. She hates him because she hears him slight her. They really play up the whole Pride and Prejudice. She's immediately made up her mind against him because he said something rude about her, which fair, but they provide so many opportunities for him, like you said, to be actually very charming. There's no awkwardness with this Darcy. There's just like the occasional sometimes being a dick. What he doesn't need to be tortured and brooding in this. Like, that's not what we're here for. We're here for like funny, like I said, again, romantic comedy. That's what this is. Girl meets boy, girl hates boy. Then the girl realizes, boy's not bad. And then they all fall in love.
What did you think about the changing of the line when he insults her? It is less personal because he says, instead of saying, I am not in a humor to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. That's very more personal. He says, I don't want to give consequence to the middle classes at play, which is more class-based, like putting her down still, but not as a reject of other men, but as someone who's going to be chasing him.
All of that is completely purposeful because the point is to just show him as a snob. Like, Lizzie's main objection to him is actually, until she finds out about the whole Jane Bingley thing. In the very beginning, it's just that he's a snob. right? So instead of insulting her personally as like deflecting his own uncomfortableness in the situation, it's just, ugh, poor people.
Yeah, but what happens later, what they've written into the book, is they have this sort of reconciliation at the Netherfield garden party, right? Which is what they did in Cinema Ball.
The Netherfield garden party.
They have a charming archery scene where she sort of pokes at him about Wickham, and he sort of very earnestly says, a gentleman doesn't have to explain his actions because I expect that people will assume good intent on my part. And then they sort of reconcile where he's like, can we start again? And it's only then where Lydia and Kitty come and they're being ridiculous and Mr. Collins comes and he's being ridiculous. And they have this very explicit thing where like Darcy's leading Elizabeth in to dance with her. And then he just bails. He's like, hope you enjoy the dance, and like leaves. And she says like, that's crappy friendship. Like they've just reconciled their friendship. And so that is an extremely personal sort of slam, which really does make you think, wow, that was a jerk move.
It almost felt like they had to keep coming up with reasons for her to dislike him. Because she would have a scene with him. So, or even after the first time he insults her at the assembly ball, right? Then he purposely gets someone to introduce them because he does notice her and he does like her right off the bat. Yeah. And he's wonderful and charming. And she's like, oh, but I hate him, blah, blah, blah. But they have to keep introducing ways after they have these amazing conversations to then have him do something that's just very snobby. So she hates him because he's clearly into her the whole time.
Yeah, very.
So it's actually, I'm not sure how much it works when he, the whole like, in vain I've struggled.
Yeah.
Did you? Because it looked to me like you were liking on her from the very beginning.
Yeah, well,
but you have to keep throwing obstacles in her way so we get that like push-pull that audiences love so much.
Yeah, well, when he's at Rosings and discovers her there, he immediately goes to her. He's like very genteel and he's like wants to be around her, and it's very clear.
So obvious.
It's so obvious. Yes,
and cute.
It's cute, and he does display some sensibility then. And Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who I know some people don't like the twist that in the end she's just trying to test Elizabeth to make sure she's worthy of Darcy.
Oh yeah, okay, so let's talk about that for a second just in case people haven't seen the movie. So they have Lady Catherine show up at Longbourn and be like, are you engaged to him? Will you promise me not to? And Lizzie of course is like, no, I will make no such promise, blah blah blah. And they go back and forth, and then Lady Catherine leaves, gets into her carriage, and Darcy is there. And she goes, you were right. She does really like you. I suppose that you deserve each other. You need a woman like her who will stand up to you. And my jaw dropped.
I know. She even says you were a spoiled child.
Such a twist.
I know, such a twist. I mean, at Rosings, she is trying to get Darcy to pay attention to Anne de Bourgh. And she is trying to say, well, your mother used to say to me, oh, I have one son, you have one daughter. Shouldn't they get married? And so clearly she's invested at the beginning in Darcy, you should be marrying my daughter. But by the end, she's a practical woman and she's like, yes, she'd be good for you, and like gives her blessing. And he's so sweet when she comes out and he's so nervous and he's like, does she really love me? I mean, it's just this really charming, cute thing where
I loved it. I actually really did love it.
And he says, no, Lady Catherine loved how rude you were to her.
Yeah, no, she loved it. Yeah, when he goes back in to like propose again, she's like, oh, it was so rude to her. And he goes, oh, it's cool. She really likes it.
I didn't hate it at all. I thought it still gave Elizabeth a chance to show her backbone and to stand up to Lady Catherine, but it also was just this delightful, busybody character who's sort of like, yes, okay, I approve.
It actually makes Lady Catherine a lot more interesting too, I think.
Yeah.
Like when we left her at Rosings, she very clearly was against this match because it meant that he wouldn't be with Anne. But then in the meantime, she clearly like loves her nephew enough to want him to be happy and to want him to be with the right woman, and has enough good judge of character to see that Lizzie is awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just really liked it. It's so hard to surprise a Jane Austen fan with an adaptation. Like how often does that happen? And I just loved it. But then I looked at Bay and I said, but what about the shades of Pemberley being thus polluted? And he's like, I guess she's okay with it.
What did you think about Greer Garson's performance? Because I think there's a lot more disagreement there.
Oh, I thought she was great. What I really loved was that she was 36 playing this role and looked stunning. I mean, she turns around in her first scene and the light is just like, screen goddess, like golden Hollywood screen goddess, of course.
Some people think that she's Elizabeth walked off the page, right? Other people don't like the portrayal. They call her a Flibberty Gibbet. Olivier
Flibberty Gibbet.
Flibberty Gibbet.
Flibberty
Gibbet. A lot of people, apparently you're an expert on how to say this word, I guess. I don't know.
I've just been saying that for a long time because I also used to watch a lot of old movies.
Some people think that it's the totally wrong tone to strike with Elizabeth, who's supposed to be very down to earth, whereas this Elizabeth is very much like her sisters and with her sisters and not embarrassed by her sisters, and they kind of went the Keira Knightley route, right, where she's just part of a happy family. But Olivier did not think Greer Garson was right for the part.
Well, do you know why?
He called her silly and affected, and does not believe that she portrayed Jane Austen's character.
Can I tell you the real reason?
Yeah, because he wanted to bone Vivien Leigh.
He was boning Vivien Leigh.
Well, he wanted to do it at his convenience.
Yes. So Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh were married to different people. They were having a very public affair. He wanted Vivien Leigh to be Lizzie so they can be in a movie together. And I think that he always was pissy that they did not put her in it. But of course, there's a lot of interesting connections between this film and Gone with the Wind. Because of course, Vivien Leigh made her big film debut. She was a British actress. She made her big film debut in Gone with the Wind the year before, which was directed by David O. Selznick, who actually produced Pride and Prejudice. And that's another one of the big reasons why they set this version, 30 years later, because they could reuse costumes from Gone with the Wind, of which they had so many.
I do think that they did reuse the costumes, but the other argument that I've heard about why they did that is because they thought Regency and Empire Waist styles would not interest people or look good on the screen. With that black and white filmmaking, I honestly really agree with them. So they pushed it up to like the 1830s so they could have these dramatically beautiful costumes, which are very interesting and fun, right, to the viewer as well.
Right, but here's the other thing about that. I actually think the reason for doing that is because this film was supposed to be in color.
Oh,
but David O. Selznick used every reel of Technicolor film that MGM owned shooting Gone with the Wind. So when it came time to shoot Pride and Prejudice, it had to be in black and white because they physically didn't have the film.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I actually think that these costumes were meant to be shown in color. Because, I mean, look at them. They even talk about the colors in the first scene. Jane, you'll be in pink, and Lizzie, you'll be in blue. And I mean, the costumes it's an explosion of color. And you look at, the dance scene. I looked at Bay and I said, they spent a ton of money on this movie. Like this was a lavish production.
Yeah.
And yet in black and white. And again, this is from IMDb, so, grain of salt. But it makes complete sense to me that they filmed in black and white, meaning to film in color, but just simply didn't have the film.
It's such a shame because it was frustrating for me to watch this movie and wanting to see the colors.
I would have loved to have seen a colorized version. I know, like, colorized, people get upset all the time. But these costumes, they're just begging to be in color.
Yeah,
I think they really are, but they're so ridiculous. The impracticalities of dressing like that in real life just seemed so, I mean, there have, 6 women because it's the daughters and Mrs. Bennet and they're all in a room. Can you imagine how loud it would be trying to walk around with all that, how hot they all must have been?
And I mean, Kevin made the point too. He's like, they're so drowned in these costumes that when Charlotte Lucas comes on the screen and everyone's like, oh, she's so plain, she's so ugly. He's like, I cannot differentiate her looks at all from any of the other women. He honestly, he could not even pick out which one was supposed to.
I was constantly getting Kitty and Lydia confused. I couldn't tell them apart. Yeah, I think that's a huge issue. It was just borderline ridiculous. Maybe that's just because we're looking at it from a modern perspective. Yeah. But all of this, it really also just drives home this idea that so much of women's fashion from that time period on was just about like hobbling women, basically. If you keep them drowning in layers and like, where are you going to, how can you can't get a job. You can't, yes, it's a way of showing your wealth, right? Like if you have that much fabric that you're wearing around on you, you have a life of leisure, but it's also a way to keep women trapped at home because they can't practically go out. Oh, can we talk about how the Bennets not poor?
Oh, yeah. Well, they are constantly referred to as like the middle class, which is not even accurate. I mean, the Bennets were not even middle class in the actual story. They are richer than 99.999% of people in England. They are gentility. They're just poised on the brink of not being gentility. And I think the reference to the middle class is supposed to help us understand the divide between Elizabeth and Darcy.
Yes. I also think that, the Longbourn is really nice and they have all those beautiful gowns. She does not repeat any wardrobe in this whole movie. Lizzie has a different stunning gown every scene.
They do still keep the detail of the entail and they're very explicit about it. And they're constantly referencing when Mr. Collins will inherit. And then at the end, you know what? And this is a slightly different point, but the social standing of the Bennets is made very clear throughout the movie, especially at the end after Lydia has eloped with Wickham. Mm-hmm. I think they still had to translate that for a modern audience, even at that time, to talk about the social disgrace that would have involved. So what they have is the Bennets preparing to move to Margate because they've been disinvited from the assembly balls because they've been besmirched by the scandal. And
I actually really liked that.
I liked it a lot too.
In the novel, it's just people talking about what the effect will be. But then in the movie, you see like, oh, they've not been allowed to come in public. Like they've been disinvited from, like there are legitimate social consequences.
And the house is in chaos. And they like, well, you can't bring your music box. You can't bring your parrot. And then the parrot's like, my poor nerves. Which is hysterical.
I bet you loved that.
I loved it so much. And Lady Catherine comes in and she sits on the music. It's funny. It's really well done, but it also is making it very clear what's happening, which I really appreciated. I thought it was really well done. One of the things I thought was interesting, what did you think? I did not think they effectively set up any kind of love between Lizzie and Wickham. She's clearly sympathetic to him. But when she hears that Lydia has eloped with Wickham, she is surprised, but she doesn't seem particularly like upset at all. She almost like smiles in a way, like, isn't this weird? And I don't think they set up Lydia as a total airhead until she comes back and she's like, oh, it's great. I have a husband now. Right. So
I agree. I think all of that is a function of time. And that, this is not a miniseries. This is a 2-hour length film. I totally agree with you. And I think we meet Wickham right away.
Yeah.
He's there from the very beginning.
And I think he and Lydia have very snappy, very grown-up, adult, sexy dialogue. Yeah, I thought they had a lot of chemistry.
I think that Wickham, I agree with you that we don't see like Lizzie could be maybe falling for him. I think it's more of a way for Darcy to be jealous.
Yeah, and to seem like a bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I thought his performance was great. What about the secondary cast of characters? Did you like the mother?
Do you mean Mrs. Bennet?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I thought she was great. I actually really liked that they played up the rivalry between Mrs. Bennet and Lady Lucas.
Oh, the carriage race. Yeah. That was funny.
Which, again, just like adds to that comedy because it's all about this comedy, right?
Yeah, so like you're saying, the screwball comedy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I appreciated that. I thought it was fun. I thought Mr. Bennet was great. I was getting very Rex Harrison vibes.
I don't know
from Mr. Bennet. Rex Harrison is the actor who was in My Fair Lady. He was in the original Dr. Dolittle. He was very famous on stage. He was also, I think, in the original cast of Camelot and My Fair Lady, both with Julie Andrews. Very famous British actor. And so I felt like, I felt like the dad was kind of giving me those vibes which
Yeah,
I liked. I was picking
good.
it up.
And he had good lines. And some of the lines that they inserted in the script were honestly good and funny. Like, maybe we should have drowned some of them at birth.
I did
You know,
not like that line. I thought it was horrible.
no, he's just joke. I mean, he's making it so ridiculous that, Mrs. Bennet is always almost making it sound like she's sorry that she had these children. And so he's taking it to the ridiculous extreme. I don't know.
I thought it went too far. I was like, Jesus. Wow, that got super dark. Did you notice his little like library ladder thing that he had?
Oh yeah.
That piece of furniture? That was rad. He had a chair that like unfolded to a step ladder so he could get to the top of his library bookshelves.
I thought that Mr. Collins, being a librarian, I understand why they did it. They didn't want to like put any men of the cloth down or whatever. I was a little bit like, why you gotta hate on librarians? We don't want him in our ranks. But I thought he was great. I loved a lot of the character things he did. I loved when he was proposing to Lizzie that he's down on his knees, and so then he has to walk on his knees as she's moving away.
Yeah.
They had this great during the proposal. He's like, you should consider no other offer of marriage will ever be made to you. And her reaction was great. She's winded. She just sits down and says, well. I mean, it was really funny and it was well played for the humor. And that's the thing about Pride and Prejudice. To have fun, you really have to understand the humor in there, I think. I mean, I know I already said this about 2005, but it's just not as fun. But anyway, let's talk about the other performances. I thought Wickham was a great performance. I thought Lydia and Kitty did great. And I have to admit that they do all have that like moment where they're all talking at once. So maybe I was too hard on Joe Wright that, they did do this sort of like young, flighty girls all saying things at the same time. We also talked about how Mary is, in your words, the fucking MVP of this movie.
That actress was so funny.
Good.
She was so hilarious. Like, you don't think of Mary as being like the, so just like in 1995 where you have Mariah Lucas, who I forget the actress's name, but I love her so much. She's just like in the background being funny. That was Mary here. I thought she was so good. Whoever that actress is, she was just like firing on all cylinders. But to get back quickly to what you were saying about everybody talking at once, the difference is the 2005 movie is a sweeping romance. The 1940 movie is a screwball comedy. Everybody talks at the same time. It's part of the genre. Like that's the joke.
Yes, and everybody talks really quickly.
Yeah, I don't think it fits in the 2005 version. Like you were saying, it's just supposed to be like, oh, look, they're all girls. Whereas in this, it's like everybody is supposed to be crazy and chattering and talking at the same time. I think the best example of this genre, if you want to watch a great old movie, I so highly recommend His Girl Friday, which has Cary Grant, and I'm going to look up who the actress is. It's also from 1940. Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. They are both journalists, and it is also a romantic comedy. And it just really is the perfect example of this, like running all around and everyone's talking at the same time and being clever and snappy. It's so good. Highly recommend if you want another great example of this genre. But yeah, I think that's why you have characters talk. And you even see it with Lizzie and Darcy. There's a lot of banter.
Yes, there's a ton of banter. The archery scene I loved. I thought they both had a lot of scope to get to know one another, to display a range of emotions, to have genuine chemistry in that archery scene where he sort of condescends to her and she sort of has the great...
He mansplains archery.
He mansplains archery. And he doesn't take it amiss. He doesn't get mad. Even she says, oh, you're a good sport. Most men would be offended, and rightly so, right?
He actually, I think, doesn't he apologize for basically trying? He was like, well, I can see I was incorrect to try to explain this to you. You clearly have it.
And they also used it as a setup for Miss Bingley to come in and to be kind of nasty to Lizzie, and for Lizzie to get some good zingers in. Like Darcy is going to apparently teach Miss Bingley how to throw darts, and Elizabeth gets this great line, well, I hope you'll learn to direct your darts with greater accuracy. And it's such a great slam. And the actress that plays Miss Bingley in this is also excellent. She's very hateable, and they give her a lot to do, especially at the end. Is it okay if I talk about another scene, or do you want to talk about archery?
All I wanted to point out is that it's very clear that the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma, this is an homage to that, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
it's
good.
great,
I just wanted
and
to make
it's
sure I
so
was on the
cute.
right page with that.
Yes. And it's so well used in Emma and for different reasons, but it's a great conceit. It's all a metaphor, right? It was very cute. One of the things I wanted to say too about Miss Bingley, first of all, the guy they got to play Mr. Bingley is, like in all other adaptations, a doll, right?
So
he is
cute.
just so cute. Yeah. Right?
Because, I mean, obviously, again, 2-hour movie, we just don't get the time. The romance between him and Jane, I didn't feel like really got a chance to be developed, but their little last scene was so romantic, I thought.
Jane gets a really nice moment where, when she's been, abandoned after all this happens, Elizabeth goes home, and Jane has a very sad soliloquy about how every day she just pretends, and it was very moving, and it showed the emotional heft of what had happened to her. And Bingley also gets a moment showing his suffering in a scene I loved, where the disgrace has happened. Lydia has run off with Wickham. Miss Bingley gets a letter from some unknown person in Meryton who's detailing with glee the disgrace that the Bennet family is coming to. They've been disinvited from the assembly ball.
That's how
Elizabeth and Jane are running down the street to avoid their, having to talk to anybody. Bingley and Darcy are listening to it, and Bingley is so upset they're playing billiards. Bingley is so upset he ruins the billiard table, right? It goes under the felt.
Yeah, he puts the cue like right through the felt on the table.
Yeah, and
he still loves Jane.
No, he's so upset. And Miss Bingley even says to Darcy, "Isn't it hilarious?" And Darcy says, "You'd find it very hilarious if it happened to yourself," because it happened to Georgiana, right? Like the same thing almost happened to him. And so he has incredible sympathy for what's going on. And of course, so this is the motivation for him to go and save Lydia and elevate Wickham and whatever. One thing I thought was weird and I didn't like is that before all this happens, when Darcy has heard about the elopement at first, he goes to Elizabeth and he's like, "I'm here to offer my services." And she's like, "Oh, thanks." But what can she really say? Like, "Yeah, why don't you go out and fix this, Darcy?" Like, I think it was kind of weird because it was kind of pointless. The only thing it did was to allow him to explain how Wickham was a bad guy. Because Maggie, after the proposal, he does not get to write his big letter.
Really quickly talking about that, I think that my main criticism of this film is actually the not pacing. It's like pacing overall is great, but pacing of plot from the novel, he doesn't propose to her the first time until 3/4 of the way through the movie. And then 2 scenes later, she's decided she's in love with him. And it didn't make a lot of sense. It was total whiplash. That first proposal had to happen much earlier. I did not like how long they put that off. I thought that it did the film a disservice.
Instead, introducing this like semi-estrangement at the garden party, and then the secondary thing. Yeah, it was weird.
But then when so it's after Lady Catherine comes and Lizzie's like, "I won't promise anything." And she goes back out and we see that Darcy's with her and he goes back in. Then he tells her about Georgiana. And despite that coming so late in the movie, after she's already decided she loves him, I think, I thought that was a really beautiful scene. The way that it's written and the way Olivier acts it, where he does tell her about what happened. I thought that was really stunning. I really enjoyed it.
You're right. It is a good scene. It is not perhaps crafted well within the larger plot, but it is well acted. I agree.
I mean, I guess my big problem with this is just I don't find it believable that she would hate Darcy because it's Laurence Olivier.
I know, right?
And it's like, so girl, what's wrong with you?
I know. Yeah, I'm with you because he's an object of desire from like the beginning, which again, like in Helen Jerome's adaptation, there's a very sexy Darcy and a very weepy Elizabeth. And thankfully, they got rid of the weeping Elizabeth in this adaptation. But it's sort of based on this, like, yeah, he's going to be the draw. He's going to be the sexy draw of this movie.
I think Greer Garson is good enough that, I'm kind of being hyperbolic to be like, you wouldn't believe. He is a snob. Like, let's be honest. He's a legit jerk to her. So yeah, like you do understand why. But about by halfway through the movie, her kind of objections, I guess other than Jane, him breaking up Jane and Bingley, don't hold water anymore. Because he isn't standoffish. Like he is a snob, but he's still pursuing her, like very clearly interested in her and courting her.
Except that moment where he walks away after he's been, like repelled by her family. The other thing is he does sort of,
during the proposal, does kind of crap on her family, and that's
he is a jerk. He is definitely a jerk.
So there are these moments where you're like, but at the same time, he also is clearly in love with her, which makes you root for him, right?
Yeah,
so
maybe I'm just a sucker. I'm just a sucker for him. I'm a Darcy apologist in this one. I'm just like, girl, you know what? He might be a jerk, but you can teach. No, it's the classic trap. You can change him. No, what am I doing?
Yeah,
the classic tale of misogyny that we tell girls, that you can change a man. Do you think that he actually changes through the course of the film?
This is a very good question.
This is the big thing, right? Do Darcy and Lizzie actually change?
You don't see Darcy interacting with Elizabeth's family when he comes back to sort of woo her and get her. He is clearly concerned for her and for her happiness and not wanting her family to be disgraced for that reason. But you don't get a feeling that he's going to be like nice to people who are poor now, like he's not going to say these cutting things unless, because of his love for her. So yeah, he doesn't go through the same revolution of character as the later Darcys do.
I 100% agree. And it just kind of came to me now. I didn't even think about that when I first watched it because I was just so enjoying it. But I think that rather than having them both change and then come together at the end, we just see them both kind of understand each other as they are. They don't change. It's just that Lizzie looks past her prejudice and Darcy looks past his pride.
Yes, and it's so darn cute. And then at the end, all the other girls, Kitty and Mary, are shown with potential suitors, including a man who's playing the flute.
Oh my gosh, that
Mary.
Was so like where did these guys come from?
Cute, and she's singing her same song that she sings throughout the movie.
High note. She's on pitch, and she hits the high note because she found love. What? But I was confused because I thought at first that was Mr. Collins who was playing.
Oh yeah, no, so
and I was like, he's married. What is happening? And where did these guys come from?
The Mary character, like we were saying, she's the comedy MVP, but she gets these great moments. And one of them is the moment where Mrs. Bennet says, "Sparkle a little, Mary, sparkle a little."
Oh my God.
And she just brightens up and like bats her eyes and like has this ridiculous smile. And I die.
Little less, Mary, a little less.
And I don't know if that was the actress singing or somebody else, but the sort of caterwauling, really poor, like really not great performance of this song that she sings throughout the movie. I have to admit, it was so funny and so good that for the last 2 days, I've been going around singing like, "Thou green-crested lapwing, thy screaming forbear." Like it's been in my head the whole time. And
you know what it really reminded me of?
But
it reminded me of that scene in the Disney Cinderella where the steps sing "Sweet Nightingale." It just reminded me so much of that. It was like that same type of singing loudly and off-key humor. But with Mary, it's just, I don't know. She's very sweet and fun in this. And I'm glad they end on a high note for her, where she was like found someone to play with her music. It was very cute.
And she's not a depressed Mary. She's a happy Mary. She's just
the first time we see her, she just bought a new book and she's so excited about it. She's like, "Oh, Mama, I just bought the essays of blah, blah, blah." And you're like, "Oh, Mary, you're the best of all of us." I thought that Lady Catherine was really good. I loved her. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people at the end are just like, "This is a total 180. It doesn't make any sense, blah, blah." But I thought it showed actual depth of character. And I thought she was really great. I thought everyone was great. It was good. This movie was pretty much firing on all cylinders. And any criticism or complaints I have just stem from kind of the basic structure.
In the mannered sort of acting of the 40s, where everybody is a tad affected. I mean, it's just not a modern movie. You can't expect the pacing and the cinematography to whip you up in the same way. And just the techniques weren't developed yet. And So if you can get past all that and you get into the mood, you do kind of have to get into the mood. I knew you would be great to talk about this because you, and I assume it's because your mom, just knows so much about the glamour of old Hollywood, right?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, you do. You know all these movies, and I just really don't know anything about it. There were a couple of things that I wanted to mention just about having gone back and read the chapter in the Making of Jane Austen again. There are so many interesting things to know about the making of this movie, including the fact that the script was rewritten and rewritten and rewritten again. So you can learn about all these scenes that were cut. They wanted to very much add a sort of Bronte twist to Darcy, which I'm glad they got
married or something.
One script version reveals that Darcy was originally to have had a second archery scene that was either never shot or didn't make the cut. Part of that scene shows Darcy alone at night, reliving his afternoon archery lesson with Elizabeth. He repeats their dialogue as a soliloquy, pining for her as he moves his lips. He then recites Byron's "She walks in beauty like the night and the dark." At the same time, he ineffectually shoots arrows, including one directly up into the night sky. If it had been included, this scene would have given Olivier even more space to demonstrate, alone with his audience, the depth of his passion for Elizabeth. The shades of Shakespeare here must certainly be intentional. The fact that Darcy and not Elizabeth gets a standalone scene speaks volumes about how Pride and Prejudice was being more deeply reimagined in the 1930s as a story centered on Austen's hero, not her heroine. That was a passage from the book. But
I like that. I could see Olivier doing that and it would be awesome. I don't think it fits with this movie. This is not a brooding Darcy, which is one of the reasons I actually really enjoyed it. We've had a lot of brooding Darcys. He didn't brood to me.
Oh, I liked it too because it allowed it to be a comedy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which the book is. And it doesn't take you out of your understanding as this guy is just a man who's pining at a normal level and not a Bronte style level. But listen to this. Another deleted scene would have taken audiences even further inside Darcy's head and in a far darker direction. The plan was to make him turn Bronte brutal. After his soliloquy, he was to bump into Miss Bingley on his night walk, still holding an arrow in his hand. The two of them were to have had a conversation conspiring about how to break up Jane and Bingley for Bingley's own good. This scene would have made directly visible one of Darcy's ugliest acts, described secondhand only in the original novel. Darcy's nefarious plotting against his friend's happiness would have been made not only disturbingly visible, but directly violent. Darcy was to have said to Caroline Bingley, "We're like a pair of conspirators plotting a murder, the murder of a man's feelings. Well, seeing it has to be done, let's do it quickly." Then Darcy was to have raised the pointed half of the arrow in his hand and driven it savagely into the bark of the tree under which they had been sitting, as though he were stabbing a man. He was then to have turned without a word and walked off. This episode is a darkly sexualized one, echoing a figurative rape as much as it does a figurative murder. It's decidedly un-Austen-like. But this scene was cut from the film for budgetary reasons and not because anyone had second thoughts about adding Shakespearean tragedy and Brontean shock to Austen's iconic hero. That was another direct quote from the book, The Making of Jane Austen. Weird, wild stuff. And then the other thing we learned...
that's a different movie and a completely different characterization
I'm so
of
glad
Darcy.
It's not in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Other scripts had Darcy, Bingley, and I guess other people going to like watch a cockfight. And then there's a monkey involved, and it was supposed to show their manliness, you know? And like, you can't do Austen that way. You can't play that. Homie, don't play that.
I think that they made good decisions cutting that stuff out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, because he's not brooding, and the way he explains the Jane Bingley thing, it's also like he doesn't understand the gravity of it. So having that scene where he like likens it to a murder, the reason why he can kind of get away with it and we forgive him is because he didn't understand what he was doing, I guess. Although, I mean, he says, I've been kinder to him than I have to myself, where the hypocrisy of him breaking up Jane and Bingley, but then still proposing.
Yeah, he sees his feelings as far, far deeper than Bingley's feelings and Jane's feelings.
And of course,
just
he thinks that Jane didn't really like him. That she was just
and
like,
he says in his letter too, to separate separate two people who had a relationship of only a few weeks pales in comparison to the other thing you've accused me of. And he sort of thinks, oh, people get their hearts broken all the time, which is very London, right? There are all these like dalliances and flirtations like that. It's very urbane to think she'll bounce back, because the London ladies would understand that your beaux are not always serious. But Jane is not that kind of person, and he's kind of missing the plot there.
He doesn't know Jane like Lizzie does.
Yeah.
I thought, would you agree that the explanation of what Wickham did to Georgiana in this movie seemed much more villainous than how it is described in the book?
Yes.
Maybe he was just more explicit here.
He was. But it was very
shocking.
It's not clear right away that Wickham failed with Georgiana. So at first you think...
I actually got the impression that he totally boned her.
Yeah.
Sorry, if you don't know what we're talking about, when Darcy does tell Lizzie what happened to Georgiana, it's like he took her away. He was going to marry her to blackmail me. And then we got them before they were married, but he might even say she was ruined. I can't remember what the language is, but it is very clearly implied that she is no longer a virgin.
I think that what he says is he was going to elope with Georgiana, ruin her, and then because he had ruined her, blackmail me into allowing and condoning the marriage.
Oh, okay.
So
that sounds right.
He says Wickham explicitly has sexual intent and intends to take her virginity, rather than just getting married in secret at Gretna Green, because who cares if Darcy approves, then the marriage is legal and Wickham gets the money. So they did make it even darker for this film.
Right. I mean, you still doesn't really explain then why he would do it with Lydia, because she doesn't have that type of money. Yeah. But, some people have struggled with that even in the novel. Like, what is the reasoning for that? But I thought that this was a much darker backstory for Georgiana than we got in the book and the other movies. Yeah. I kind of liked it, because then the sympathy and the responsibility he felt for this happening to Lizzie's family felt much as strong. Do you know what I mean? Like, he realizes how the stakes are, and him trusting her with this information seems more impactful. I liked that change a lot. It also made Wickham like way more villainous, which I'm always a fan of. And Wickham, villain mustache. Should have known from the first scene when he had that stash, he was a bad dude.
They have some great dialogue. Wickham is very charming in the beginning with Lydia and with Lizzie, and so you kind of like him at first, and so it is kind of a shock what he gets up to.
I just thought this was so fun. I would definitely watch this one again. Don't you think?
Me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
How many times did you watch it before this podcast?
3 times. I've seen it 3 times in total now.
Okay, I watched it once.
Yeah, you have to be in the mood. I mean, you have to be in the mood for old school glamour. I have to say that I was so moved by Olivier's performance that I rented Wuthering Heights to see him do something else.
Like, that's right. Oh my God.
Despite
he's Heathcliff, isn't he? He's like the Heathcliff.
Yeah, he's coming right off of both playing Heathcliff and playing somebody in Rebecca, de Maurier's Rebecca. They also
oh my God.
And so he was seen as this brooding hero, which probably helped his portrayal as Darcy to be seen as slightly more tortured, right? Because people had this idea of him.
I didn't get that at all, though. I didn't see like the brooding, tortured aspect of it.
No, it may have just been I didn't see it either, but it may have just been a cast in people's minds. Like he's like a bad dude, but he's a sexy dude.
Well, I will say after the news about Lydia breaks, we do see him kind of brooding on it, because I'm sure but he feels guilty, right? Because, if I had told, this wouldn't have happened. But overall, I don't. Oh man, I think I might have to watch that too. What did you think?
I couldn't do it. I hate Wuthering Heights with such a passion that, and, you know, of course, it was the 1940s, so they didn't necessarily grab me with the filmmaking right away. So you have to have some patience when you're watching these movies.
So did you actually start it, or did
I
you
started
just feel
it.
like I can't do it?
I watched about 15 minutes of it, and I was like, I got to bail. He was good. Everything else about it was Wuthering Heights, which is not my jam. And so I had to cut it loose.
Have I ever given you my Wuthering Heights confession?
No.
There was a copy of it in my high school, and I was like, oh, I should read this. Classic. It's supposed to be really romantic. The first chapter. I was like, this is terrible. I stopped reading it. I never even got to the part where you meet, because the book opens, they're dead.
Yeah.
It's that guy who like wanders in off the moors. I don't even remember. I never even got to the part of the novel where Heathcliff and Catherine are alive.
Well,
I just pieced out after like
that's such a convention of that era that Austen actually skewers in Northanger Abbey, because he comes in and then the lady's like, I'll tell you a tale, right? And then conversations that had passed 20 years ago were minutely repeated, and it doesn't make any sense. Stop these weird setups. And you already know the story doesn't end happily, so you're not thrilled about it. I thought, you know, I had to read it in high school. It was my first introduction to the Brontes. And I thought, because everyone mentions the Brontes and Austen in the same breath, I was like, oh, I'm going to really enjoy this. And I was reading it and I was like, what the shit is this? Sucks so hard. And I've been enraged against the Brontes ever freaking since. I also had to read Jane
disclaimer. If anybody out there, if you enjoy the Brontes, we don't mean, you know, it's just not for us.
They're
we
not
don't
the
mean,
thing.
yeah, they're not the same
Totally
thing.
different thing. As we talked about this on our private Facebook pages a long time ago now, and our friend Sarah was like, you know, don't yuck somebody else's yum. Okay. Sometimes I'm in a Bronte mood, sometimes in an Austen mood. And I'm like, that's fine. They are totally different things and cannot be compared. And
but
if
also, this is our podcast.
I know, right? But if you're getting,
so if I don't like, I can say that I don't like Bronte.
If you're reading something out and getting something out of it, and I certainly understand and believe that Jane Eyre can really be a balm to people who are feeling left out, maltreated, poor and plain. You know, I get that brings you some sort of feeling of redemption, or you're just invested in Jane Eyre. I get it. It wasn't for me personally.
Romance, right?
Yeah, and if you like Gothic, and you know, if you're willing to go on that Rochester ride or that Heathcliff ride, I mean, more power to you. I mean, we all will read things that are problematic, right? Sometimes I even write things that are problematic, right? Totally get it. But woo, yeah.
Okay, but Kristin, I have a proposal for you.
Oh, good. I love this proposal.
What if we were to do some kind of like Black Lives Matter fundraiser, something like that? And I haven't thought this through. I'm spitballing, but you know, if for example, we like try to get people to pledge a certain amount of money that they'll donate. And if we get to a certain amount, you and I have to watch Wuthering Heights, the more recent Ray Fiennes version. What do you think?
Yes. I think we have about 500 subscribers. So I think a reasonable target will be, if we can raise $200, that we will watch the movie with Ray Fiennes. If we can, in some insane universe, raise $300, I will read the book again.
I'm going to have to read it too, right? It's not fair if only you have to read it.
Yeah,
I think that you should make it 400 to read the book.
Okay, 200 to watch a movie, 400 to read the book. And
I will put this on the Facebook page and you can tweet about it.
Yes.
And maybe I can put like you can put fundraisers on Facebook.
Yeah,
so maybe
you totally can.
Or people can also just let us know if they've made a donation, and we can also keep track that way if they don't necessarily use Facebook.
Right.
But I think that's fair. You know, we'll throw ourselves on that Gothic pyre for charity.
And then get on the podcast and say all kind of mean things about it.
Yeah. What if you end up liking it?
Well, what we'll have to do is read some scholarship about it, because I know there's some racial things with Heathcliff, and all this. And the other thing is, if you're not on
supposed to be mixed race or something like that.
Yeah, they keep calling him a gypsy, which of course.
What?
Yeah, there's some racial stuff there. I think to say that all of that is to say, maybe I should also read some scholarship or get some context. But we all know, why do we have to read this crap in high school? We all know it's about nature as a character and blah blah blah. I mean, I don't care about this. But anyway, maybe in trying to learn more about their themes, I will learn something about myself or enjoy it in some manner. So you'll never know. We'll see.
And if you want, I can have Bay's mom talk to us about it, because she was an English teacher and she apparently loves Bronte. So
really? That would be cool. That would be really cool.
And like you ask her for her thoughts in an email, a little less pressure. But we'll see. I'm sure that there are people who listen to our podcast who love Wuthering Heights and would be willing to kind of. But we'll see. It all depends on you, our listeners, whether we're able to raise enough money to meet our target. So stay tuned for that. We'll put it on our social media when we're ready to get the fundraiser going.
And as Maggie said, if you are not a Facebook user for whatever reason, you can also email us at first.impressions.podcast@gmail.com and just say you've donated, and we will take your word for it.
So are we asking people to donate to the Black Lives Matter website directly? Or you know what? I think what we should say is, if you want to donate to Black Lives Matter, or if you want to donate to something like the bail funds, anything that serves the cause of fighting racial injustice, systemic racial injustice, we will accept. So I will put a link to, the main BLM website for donations on our Facebook page. But if there's another related cause or site or charity that you would like to donate to, that counts as well. We don't want to limit your activism, but just let us know if you make a donation via Twitter, Gmail, Facebook, and so we can keep you in the counting. It'll be like a church where they're like trying to get to the top of the thermometer and like blow them, like we need to buy a new roof, like in Sister Act.
Yeah. Oh man, let's do a mini pod on Sister Act.
Do you want to?
Yes, I fucking love
I'm
that
so
movie.
in. Okay, now that you're working at home again.
Yeah.
I can watch it tomorrow. I have tomorrow off.
Oh, yes, let's watch it soon. I need it. It's balm for my soul. I need it. I watched that YouTube video where it's just that number all the time.
Did you share it recently?
I did. And you know what else I watch is Judy Garland's performance of Get Happy in whatever that movie was, Summer something. Yeah, it's so good. Like,
depending on how long you're stuck at home, maybe I can introduce you to some Golden Age movie musicals. That's what I really like. I mean, you were saying like I know about glamour Hollywood. It's really, I just love like 1940s Golden Age musicals. Yeah, I mean, you can cut all of this discussion out if you want.
I don't know. People love it. People love us. You know what I feel so bad about, Maggie, is that our Sanditon episode has like 300 or 400 more downloads than anything, and then it should have any right to based on our stats. And I thought this was so weird for so long, but then I realized people were Googling Sanditon because they were into the show, finding our episode, downloading it, and probably being really freaking disappointed, because all we talk about is like the corn laws and the state of medical science, and I go on a long rant about like medical science today, and like I'm sure people were like, nope.
Well, I joined the Save Sanditon Facebook group, which is super active, also on Twitter. And so I like name checked our podcast a couple times. So that might be how people saw it as well. If you want, I mean, I would be willing to do a Sanditon rewatch if you actually want to do did we do a whole episode just about the miniseries?
No, we didn't. We just talked about the first 3 episodes because by the time we did our podcast, only the first 3 had aired. So yeah, we could do like just a fan podcast on the show, which I love. You know about the pineapple, right?
Oh yes, we talked a lot about the pineapple.
Okay, and do not use it as a support of Sanditon. Okay, so as long as you know about that.
Yes, I do know about that, and I actually agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think the problematic aspect of it is explicitly referenced in the show.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why people thought it was appropriate to use.
Exactly.
I will say though, I am from Virginia. There are pineapples all the place here because it's a symbol of Southern, specifically Virginia hospitality. But the reason why is because of the triangle trade. So,
Yeah, and I mean, some other interesting things have come out where Crystal Clark, the actress who plays Miss Lamb, has come out and said, in one of the original scripts, Miss Lamb, Georgiana Lamb, is saying to Otis Molyneux, right, like, you care more about freeing the slaves than you care about me, right, because he's in Sons of Africa. And she had to, like, take people aside and say, like, no, she wouldn't have felt this way. Like, this is ridiculous. She's not a narcissist. She actually cares about the plight of other enslaved people. And so there's a lot of stuff in Sanditon that we need to be listening to Crystal Clark, and we need to be listening to other actors of color about how to handle these things if we're not even already there already,
And she's also been very open about she said, I will not, if there is a season 2, I would not come back unless there were people of color on the writing staff, if there were people of color running and making the show, because apparently there weren't any. So they wanted to get all the credit of, like, having a woman of color in a Jane Austen adaptation, and then that's it, like, just her, nobody else, none of the people even writing the story. It was all white folks,
which is honestly infuriating.
Yeah.
So good for her. I'm glad she said that. Good for her.
Yeah, I'm definitely with her. Do we need to go to the Wheat Sheaf today, Kristin?
Yes, we can go to the Wheat Sheaf if you're willing to put up with the fact that I haven't even opened the mailbox. We have to talk about our fan Audrey, who emailed us with a fascinating question about biopics of Jane Austen. Have we watched Becoming Jane? What are our thoughts on Austen biopics? And she mentioned, she thought it was curious how Becoming Jane, in a way, seems to be a mashup of sorts of the characterizations from Austen. And I think that's fine in a way. Well, here's my larger thing. I am not comfortable with biopics of Jane Austen's life. If you are comfortable with them, everybody's going to feel differently, and I support that. I think that it's not too strong a word to use to call it disrespectful. I know that if I came back and people were writing fictionalized romances where, people they thought, oh, she knew this guy and dated him and it changed her forever and it made her think in these different ways. And I'd be like, who are you? You weren't there. I would be very frustrated. I don't know if the real Jane Austen would feel that way, or if she'd appreciate people respecting the heartbreak of when Tom Lefroy, didn't marry her or whatever. But I am not comfortable with it. I know a lot of people have seen them and enjoyed them, and that's totally fine. I don't judge other people, but that's what I think. I was also, by the way, infuriated by Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
Oh, come on.
No, it's not okay. It's not okay. Go watch the 6-hour Ken Burns documentary about the human costs of the Civil War, and then come back and make a joke about Abraham Lincoln being a vampire slayer. I do not sign on to that. But anyway, so you can see I'm a zealot on this particular issue. I bring that up because I know people don't feel the same way I do. So Maggie, you said you had seen Becoming Jane, right?
Oh, yeah, I saw it when it came out in the theater. I think any biopic about Jane Austen is fiction because there's just so many things we don't know about her life. So I don't see it as actually being about Jane Austen. Do you know what I mean? It's just like someone who was a writer who lived back then. It's so divorced from the actual person because we just don't know that. I don't see it as being like disrespectful or offensive like you. I just think it's kind of like, why? But for the why as to why Becoming Jane with Anne Hathaway was made, that was Jane Austen fever that time. Right. So it definitely makes sense that someone was like, ooh, let's make another like Regency romance, except we'll have Jane Austen herself be the character because of all these things that happened in her life. But we don't know. There's just so much we don't know about her. So I don't take it personally. If you really like that film, I haven't seen it in a long time. I just remember it being kind of sad, so I'm not eager to revisit it. If that's your thing, that's cool. I just kind of see it as I don't really get the point.
We are all fascinated by Jane Austen the person, and understandably so. So I get it. I get the interest, but at the same time, I'm uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. So I guess the answer to the question is I wasn't planning to revisit it. Kristin's not comfortable with it. So I don't think it'll be something that, we like watch and cover unless Kristin decides she's desperate for content.
Yeah, I guess.
Unless we raise like $1,000 for Black Lives Matter.
Oh my God. Yeah,
Okay,
revisiting.
right.
Watch us raise $1,000.
Well, then you'll have to do it. So
Yeah.
I'll have my iced coffee. You can get drunk and we'll watch Becoming Jane if we get $1,000.
And then that we did have some kind people like contact us. Our listener Harriet enjoyed our episode on the 2005 P&P, which I always love hearing. And she did not see the American version. So she heard people talk about this finale, this ending scene, and she went to see it. She looked it up and watched it, and then she was sorry she did. So Harriet, we're all sorry that you had to see that as well. She's an Australian. And she has her own Jane Austen podcast. So there's a podcast out there called Reading Jane Austen, and she's going through Pride and Prejudice right now, like chapter by chapter, which sounds awesome. And she's also giving commentary on McFadden's Darcy. Yeah, so check that out. It's called Reading Jane Austen. I'm not a podcast listener, but totally think other people should be listening to all the Jane Austen podcasts. One more final shout out to Olivia, who just found us, and she's enjoying our analysis of Mansfield Park. And
of course, everybody loves the Mansfield Park episodes.
Yeah, and so she's saying she was reading the book and she enjoyed it so much, but she couldn't figure out why it was the least popular work. So she took a look and found our podcast, and hooray, another Mansfield Park person.
Yay, Olivia, welcome to the cult. We're so
welcome to the cult of Mansfield Park.
Yes. I would say that I am the person who like visits the cult and is like, I can appreciate what you all get out of this, and I see where you're going, but I'll probably just go home. Bye.
So I think that is probably it.
Lots of fun letters. We love hearing from you guys. As always, don't hesitate to message us on Facebook, email, tweet at us. Kristin, what's our Twitter?
We have a Twitter. It's at First Impress Pod. Because I couldn't do First Impressions Podcast because it's too long for the Twitter handle. So it's just me tweeting about Jane Austen things, and you're welcome to follow us and say hello, and hopefully that'll be cool.
Yes, I do not use the Twitter. 'Tis a step too far for social media. I use Facebook and Insta.
You know what we got to do? We have to review the Frances O'Connor Mansfield Park.
We already did, didn't we?
No, we reviewed the Billy Piper.
Wow, I could have sworn we did. Wow, I can't believe we haven't done that.
No, because
you mean the Jane Austen biopic that they shoehorned?
Yes, and that's what I was going to bring up. I was like, people are fascinated by Jane Austen. They're trying to even insert her into her own stories. So, I think one of the reasons we haven't done it is I haven't trusted myself, because I will be very severe upon it, but I also feel like people who make art should be respected and shouldn't be crapped all over and should be supported.
Except for the Brontes.
They're dead, so I don't
They're
care.
dead. So is Abraham Lincoln.
His memory lives on.
That's true.
But anyway, no, I know that's very inconsistent.
You're allowed to, you know what? We're human. You're allowed to be inconsistent. You can like one thing and feel one way about something, and then something similar.
Yeah, and presumably, this is my podcast. I get salty on it all the time. Presumably, my listeners want to hear my invective and enjoy it. And
I love it.
I'll have to try to walk a line where I'm not too mad. By the way, in the past, I have referred to this version as the Frances McDormand version, which I am extremely embarrassed about.
Completely different actress.
It is not. It is a completely different actress.
Kristin.
I just have a really hard time with proper names, and I'm constantly getting actors with the same names confused, or even people with the same names, like Aaron Paul and Ron Paul. Like they're
Wait a minute. Aaron Paul, the actor from Breaking Bad,
Yes.
and Ron Paul, the politician.
I say one name when I mean
Kristin.
the other name. I do. I say one name when I mean the other name, and it's embarrassing. And this happens to me all the time. And I'm just so glad that Jack Nicholas and Jack Nicholson are no longer in the public discourse, and I will not make a freaking fool of myself once again. So anyway, so I apologize for everybody who's like, what? When I said that, it's just me. I do that kind of thing all the time. So anyway, Frances O'Connor. Go ahead.
I have to tell you who I mess up all the time.
Who?
I mix up Andrew Lloyd Webber, the composer, and Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect. And so I'll say Andrew Lloyd Wright. And Dave is like, who the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, the guy who wrote Cats and apparently designed Falling Water, that guy. So they're not even in the same ballpark, and they just have 3 names each. And I make this weird hybrid name all the time.
I'm glad I'm not the only person.
No, but I do know the difference between Aaron Paul and Ron Paul.
I know the difference is just the name. The names are easy to mix up. And Paul Ryan. That's the third guy I mixed up with those other 2. So
is that the actor too? The one who's dead?
Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Oh, who am I thinking of? Who's the guy from the Fast and the Furious movies?
Oh my God. Ryan Walker? Is it Paul Walker?
Yeah, Paul Walker.
People need to stop being named with P's and R's.
Hey, no Pauls and no
Ryan's.
Okay, so now this has gone into. Look at me. I was throwing so much shade at you, and then I don't know who you're talking about. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, God, I hated him. The guy who was in Congress. Blech.
Yes. I'll have to take this out. Now we've gotten political again.
Ever. What a piece of shit. You can leave that in if you want. I don't care.
I know.
Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you for listening to Kristin Maggie's Nutrition, Health Sciences, Politics podcast. And we will just, I guess, leave it there for today.
We'll post details of our upcoming fundraiser. And we have delighted you long enough.
Indeed. Bye.
Bye.